So a few weeks ago, Mark and I ran a survey in our newsletter asking our readers all kinds of questions about the economics of dating, how much people spend on dates, where they go, how inflation has affected them. And today we're going to talk through some of those results. You can check out our email. We've got a full breakdown of all the results there. All right, Mark. So you and I are now, I guess, both married men.
Yes.
So kind of funny that we're leading the charge on a dating survey here. But so one of the reasons we decided to explore the economics of dating right now is that obviously we've been dealing with rampant inflation over the past year, and it seems like daters have been hit especially hard. The cost of food has gone up, the cost of drinks has gone up, the cost of gas and transportation has gone up. It doesn't seem like it's an easy time to be on the dating scene right now as a single person.
No, it's like literally every component is like what we are thinking of when we think of inflation is certainly impacted when it comes to dating. Like if people like get brunch and do eggs, I feel like that's the only way that it could be any more impacted.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I think we wanted to do this survey to just kind of flesh out like what it means to sort of date in the year 2023 in this kind of unusual economic period, you know? And it's interesting because I think people 2-3 years ago when the pandemic began, for instance, people were dating in different ways. They were going on walks, maybe Zooms before they'd meet with somebody, maybe even a couple of Zooms before they would actually meet in person. And I think people often saved a lot of money in those days. And now we're kind of back out to something that resembles more of the 2019, the 2017, if you will, dating life. And except for the fact that it is without question more expensive. And I think that our survey results are, pretty fascinating around finances.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, a lot of people at the height of the pandemic were trying to find workaround dates, maybe going on walks and hikes. One of the questions we asked was actually, what is your go-to first date? And we should say here, before we get into the results, we got about 700 responses. Our audience does skew a little bit younger than the typical national average of 38 years old. It also skews slightly male and slightly higher earning than the average American demographic. But we asked this question, what is your go-to first date? And I was kind of surprised how few people go on like active dates or just go to movies. It wasn't that many. And like overwhelmingly by far, people just go to get drinks at a bar.
Yeah. I mean, that was, I believe around 49% of respondents said that. 27% said dinner, which is basically like the cousin of, of drinks at a bar. It's like slightly longer and slightly more formal. And then it was 21% said something active, 2% hang out at home. I'm interested in who those 2% are. And then 1% for a movie, which was extremely low. And to add a little kind of perspective to the something active equation that I also thought would be a bit higher, I did speak to someone from Colorado who she really likes to do active things when she goes out on dates, and she dates men, by the way. And there's a couple of hurdles to it, though, she told me, which is that for one thing, like active dates can tend to be a little bit more expensive.
Another thing I found interesting here is a question in our survey was, do you typically pay for a date? And if you look at it across gender lines, there is sort of this trope that men should pay for dates. A lot of people think it's outdated. Among our respondents, the responses were very traditional. Men paid for dates the vast majority of the time. I think over 80% of male respondents said that they always paid for the date. And I think only something like 5% of women said that they always paid for the date. Although splitting the bill seemed to be a little more robust, at least. So, but when it comes to sharing the bill, things just are still very traditional.
Yeah, right. And I wonder, of that 83%, that might be one of those survey questions where the actual number could be a little bit lower in real life, but people like to say that they always pay for it.
All right. Well, let's move on to the cost of the date here, because that was kind of the meat of our survey. We found across, our 700 responses that the average spend on a date is somewhere around $68. $68 hopefully is enough to cover a few drinks at a bar these days. I don't know. But again, that figure, if you break it across demographics, the average man who pays for a date said he spent $87 on a date. That's nearly 30% higher, while the average woman said she spent about $48 when she did pay for a date. Also, across age lines, Gen Z and millennials spent less than the average. Average Gen Z respondent only spent about $49 on a date. Gen Xers spent the most, $82 per date. And then, of course, across income, lower earners, as expected, spent significantly less than higher earners on dates. So there does seem to be sort of a correlation between how much you earn and how much you spend on dates. But when we looked at inflation and the impact of inflation, people acknowledged that dates have gotten considerably more expensive, but they weren't really willing to reel back on their dating habits.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think like the exact numbers from the survey showed that, the vast majority, 85%, have noticed that dating has gotten more expensive, but only around 38% said it has caused them to go on fewer dates. But that's still a pretty big chunk when you think about it. And it may not be, when you match it up to that 85, it's not a lot, but that means more than a third of people have decided to kind of change their dating habits because of inflation. And to bring up that conversation again I had with this woman from Colorado who kind of, told me gave me a little bit deeper look at some of the decisions she's made because of finances in dating. She has gone on fewer dates, she believes, because of it. And, and she couldn't even, when she tried to explain that to me, she was like, I know it sounds really weird that I'm doing it, but she just feels like she is. It's changing the types of dates she goes on. As mentioned before, those activity dates can be more expensive. But like she even like laid out this scenario where like, hey, if you go for like a walk, that's free. But if like the date is going well, typically you're going to go get a drink after that, or maybe dinner after that. And so that's kind of something that she thinks about. And those thoughts she's evaluating, really making these kind of decisions about like, okay, like how do I want to spend my social time? Like I can go to dinner with my friends, which will be expensive, but I know it'll be fun. Or I can go on a date and it'll be potentially expensive and who knows what's going to happen. So those are calculations that people are making.
I do feel like there is sort of a stigma about trying to find cheaper alternatives for dates, though. I imagine some people out in the dating scene take umbrage if you suggest going on a date that does not cost money. Yeah. It's like, what? I'm not worth spending money on? Like, and one data point to sort of back up this thesis is that we asked, has a person's income ever dictated whether or not you go on a date with them? And about half of respondents said that it has. So people clearly think about finances and money and economics as it relates to dating, both before and during their dates.
And I mean, it depends obviously on the dating app, which is how a lot of people, of course, find dates. But the person's profession is usually front and center, or, certainly at least somewhere pretty visible on the profile. So it's very easy to tell, if not exactly what somebody's income is, before you know, like, almost anything else about them, right? Like you're probably going to know like at least salary range or something that would hint at what their earnings are. And, just some of the survey responses we saw is that like the apps in some ways devalue like the dating experience to where like you don't really want to go on that special or potentially expensive of a first date or a second date because it feels like there are so many out there. And you're not sure if the other person is going to take it all that seriously because that they have such a wide variety of things out there. And there was a lot of people who said that in our survey.
The last thing I'll say on that note is I did sort of, in the process of going through the survey, came across some research by this researcher who suggested that if your goal is to find an ideal partner, there is something called the optimal stopping theory. It's basically like when you want to determine when to take a certain action that will maximize the payoff and minimize your future costs. And this applies to many things, not just dating. But in the context of dating, this researcher found that you want to reject the first 37% of potential matches to maximize your chances of finding the most ideal partner. I guess it's like a low-hanging fruit type of theory where like the first opportunities that come in won't usually be the best. And then there's sort of a breaking point at 37% where you start getting into the territory of ideal matches. I don't know if that holds any water, but that is one theory that's out there on dating.
Super exact.
If anyone's curious. Yeah, very exact. And I should say this guy was a particle physicist and a mathematician. And I'd be very curious to hear about his own personal success.
Right, yeah, personal narrative essay. That's what we want.
Yeah. Dating is not mathematical or scientific, as anyone who dates a lot probably knows. But anyway, if you want to find more on this survey, we've got a full breakdown of the results. Go and check it out at thehustle.co/stories if you're interested. And that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for tuning into the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor today was Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer was Darren Clark. We will catch you all next week.